Welcome to Phone Farage, live on telegraph.co.uk. This is your chance to question Nigel Farage, fresh from his performance at this week's debate with the Deputy Prime Minister. Mr Farage's position on the EU is well known. He wants a referendum, and he wants it now. So today's event isn't going to be about him arguing with other politicians. Mr Farage will be hearing direct from Telegraph readers and viewers, like you, on a whole range of issues. And you can get in touch by email. The address is phonefarage@telegraph.co.uk or on Twitter with the hashtag phonefarage. And we'll try to get through as many questions as possible. Nigel, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it. I know people are very excited to speak to you. And the first caller is Mr Robert Stewart, who is a retired internal auditor. Mr Stewart has a question for you about today's developments with the Culture Secretary, Maria Miller. Mr Stewart.
Mr Farage, if one of your ministers had behaved as Maria Miller has, would you have sacked them? And will you assure voters that you would do so if you gain power?
Nigel.
Thank you. I must say, I find it extraordinary that we have a cabinet minister who appears not to know where she lives. I find that absolutely extraordinary. I just don't get why she's only repaying 5,800. She should be paying back multiples of that, it seems to me.
Right.
Because it seems to me what's happened here is quite deliberate. But to Robert's question, I think David Cameron has made a disastrous error of judgment with this. I think after the last expenses scandal, which of course the Telegraph brought to the nation, I think the public appetite for this sort of thing, there is no tolerance anymore of this. And I think that Cameron should have asked her to resign. And if she hadn't resigned, he should have kicked her out.
Right.
And the second part of the question, we too have had our problems in the European Parliament with UKIP MEPs who have behaved badly. And in the two big cases that I've had, both times I've got rid of people because I didn't trust them and didn't believe they were telling me the truth. So yes, I think we have to have much more discipline in politics and much more understanding that the public do not want to have the mickey taken out of them like this.
OK. Well, we've got another question now, which is from Mr Lee Sefton, who is considering voting UKIP at the next election. Good news for you. But he needs more convincing on the economy and on pensioner benefits in particular. Mr Sefton, would you like to speak to Nigel?
Good afternoon, Nigel.
Good afternoon.
Can we know what is the economic policy of UKIP? Because if you have to join a coalition, if you win enough votes, we would like to know what would your economic policy be. Yeah,
I mean, I think one of the big failings of this government is that it genuinely has not had a growth strategy, and we need a growth strategy. We've heard lots of talk about manufacturing from Osborne and rebalancing the British economy, when actually what this government has done is to load our manufacturing industries with yet more cost. I'm talking about energy prices. People don't realise that roughly 40% of the cost of running a manufacturing factory, 40% is energy. Mm-hmm. You know, it's way more than wages. Interesting, that INEOS plant up in Runcorn, that plant uses more electricity than the whole of Liverpool. So we need to give manufacturing industry cheap energy because, you know, the Americans have done it with the shale gas boom. The Indians and Chinese between them are building 4 coal-fired power stations every week. But because of our signature on a series of agreements in Brussels, we've got expensive energy. Point 2, and this can only happen outside the European Union, we absolutely have to deregulate small business in this country. It is ludicrous that a rule book for employment, health and safety at work, designed, frankly, for giant multinationals, applies to a local hardware store down the street with 3 employees. We've got to lift the burden of regulation off the backs of our 4.5 million men and women running small businesses in this country, and that, I believe, will lead for growth. And the other thing, Lee, that we have got to get right, and we haven't done it yet, but we'll be doing this over the course of the summer, is we need to discuss the elephant in the room. The elephant in the room, of course, is the fact that in the lifetime of this coalition government, our national debt will have increased by 40%, and no one's talking about it.
Right.
You know, this coalition was formed, remember, with the Liberal Democrats and the Tories saying that by 2015 the deficit would have disappeared. It's still over 100 billion sterling a year. Our national debt is ballooning up towards 1.4 trillion. And what UKIP has to do heading up to the next general election, and it won't be easy. What we have to do is to show where government can cut spending, because we cannot go on like this.
Okay, okay. I want to ask you, Mr. Sefton, are you happy with that answer? Oh, no, Mr. Sefton's gone, so we're going to...
Obviously not, then. He didn't like it.
I want to ask on his behalf, though. He did mention to us about pensioner benefits. How would you protect those? Because you talk a lot about cutting and things like that, but will that not affect people concerned about their savings and their pensions?
Well, you have to decide, you know, if you're going to cut government spending, you have to decide where those cuts are going to come.
Right.
Right? So, obviously, I'm going to say to you that the money we give the European Union, you know, 1% of our gross income, that should be cut. I'm also going to say to you that the more I look at the foreign aid budget, getting on for 12 billion sterling a year now, nearly £1 billion a month, only 2 billion of it gets spent on what you and I would call humanitarian projects.
Right.
2 billion gets spent, you know, on providing clean water, vaccinations against polio and things like that. From what I can see, most of the rest of it is spent on political projects. So I'm expecting some big cuts there. But, you know, the big areas, of course, the massive areas, are the National Health Service, the Social Security budget. These are the big areas. And from what I can see, since 1997, the growth of middle management, the cost of actually administering these departments has become gargantuan. You know, Blair said he would double spending on the National Health Service. He did.
Okay.
He kept the promise, but with a 44% growth in middle management. So I genuinely do think, you know, when you sort of occasionally hear of a big businessman that says he'd like to run the National Health Service and streamline it and get better value for money, I think that's the approach we've got to take.
Okay, okay, okay. Better value for money. We're going to move on to a question from Janine Battersby, who is a marketing consultant in Surrey, and Ms. Battersby has some concerns about the way your party is run. Would you like to give us those concerns, please?
Hello.
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 Good afternoon to you, Mr. Farage and Tim. My question is that it strikes me that UKIP is Nigel Farage and Nigel Farage is UKIP. And I say this as I find your colleagues unable to articulate UKIP in the way you do. Also, you have a challenge ahead of you, it seems to me, in terms of cohesion and consistency and discipline amongst your enthusiastic members and candidates. How do you plan to get your party into an appropriate state such that it could be a viable, effective political partner for the 2015 general election?
Well, Janine, there are lots of questions there.
There are.
You know, I mean, we need half an hour on this question, really. But no, I mean, first things first. OK, I accept that I've been a rather dominant figure in UKIP, yes. And it has led to the accusation that we're a one-man party, to which the answer is it's better than being a no-man party. But actually, you'll notice over the course of the last 3 or 4 months, there are a lot more faces appearing on the media from UKIP than just me. And in fact, I have cut back the media that I'm doing and being more selective about what I do. I mean, if you just look in the last few days, Patrick O'Flynn, who came to us after 25 years on the Express Group, newspapers, you know, Patrick's done a lot of frontline media in the last few days and he's quite superb. We have a younger guy from Thurrock, Tim Aker, head of policy, and again, Tim appearing on more and more radio and television programmes and doing well. Diane James, who stood for us in Eastleigh in the by-election last year, and again, you're seeing more and more of her. Also, Janine, the European elections will change the face of UKIP because what has happened, and it's happened without any positive discrimination, it's happened without female shortlists, is that the women that have qualified to stand for us in the European elections have done phenomenally well. So all over the country, we find women at number 1 and number 2 on our lists. So,
Okay.
so UKIP will look very different after that time. Now, as far as the rest of the party is concerned, discipline, cohesion, look, this is the biggest trouble I face. Because on the one hand, I want us to be a party of free speech.
Yeah.
I want us to be a party that pushes the boundaries of debate and gets people thinking within UKIP and without UKIP. But on the other hand, I don't need people who cause massive distractions from the main issues that we're campaigning on.
Yeah.
So there
people
is no
like Godfrey Bloom, obviously.
Well,
the name
yeah,
is
I mean, well, yeah, but there was, I mean,
I want to bring Janine back in here.
Yeah.
Janine, do you feel UKIP is a one-man band at the moment? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I do. And I was extraordinarily disappointed in hearing the response by your number 2, Mr. Farage, after your debate on Wednesday, for example. it just doesn't sound like a meaningful display of support for you, even, because it's just a rhetoric that's constantly being repeated, and it's not articulated in the way you substantiate your arguments, and it just seems to me to let you down.
Well, Janine, you know, we're all different. We're all different. All I can say is that UKIP is evolving, changing, growing, and I think there is considerably more talent in UKIP than there was. And the other exciting thing about UKIP is the membership has grown very rapidly. I mean, we've pretty much doubled our membership in the last 17, 18 months. And there's a lot more talent at grassroots level as well. And I know that our councillors and our council candidates get picked to bits by the media. But actually, you know, when I travel around the country and meet UKIPers that are standing for us every Thursday when we've got local district and council and county council by-elections, I think the average standard and level of enthusiasm, it really is going through the roof. So overall, Janine, I think it's going in the right direction.
Okay. Well, let's move on to Mr. Tim Gallagher, who is a party member and who supports you on the EU, but he's not convinced at all by some areas of your foreign policy. Mr. Gallagher, what's your question?
Hiya, hi Tim, hi Mr. Farage.
Hello.
Nice to meet you. Yeah, basically, Nigel, I've got friends and family in the Ukraine, and I was on the Maidan Square in January, so I've got quite a good idea about what's going on over there. And I'm pretty upset. My wife is very upset about your, you know, what you said about it all being the EU's fault. So my question really is, how do I now believe you on your EU policy when I know that you're wrong on the Ukraine?
Well, I'm not just blaming the EU. I mean, the biggest cheerleaders for this mistaken foreign policy, in my view, you may take a different one, but the biggest cheerleaders for this have, of course, been Cameron and Hague, who have been saying very clearly for 10 years the Ukraine must join the European Union, and we should also consider extending NATO membership to the Ukraine. And I believe that just saying that has been very provocative towards Russia. Whatever we think of Russia and the Russian regime, it's been very provocative. And I think the EU, along with our government, has offered, frankly, a series of false hopes to those Western Ukrainians. I mean, look, Tim, you know, we're lucky being an island in many ways. You look at the history of that particular landmass, and it is very complicated. And you've got the Catholic West and the Orthodox East, and I mean, you know, there are no simple answers here. But what I am saying, Tim, is this: I do not want this country to have any part of an expansionist and, in terms of ambitions, militarist European Union. I do not believe that will be a force for good.
That's fair enough, but I don't want to push on this because this is something that's got you in a lot of trouble this past week, because you seem to be missing the point that many Ukrainians do want to join the EU. This is one rare instance where people do want to be inside it. Their desire was frustrated by Vladimir Putin.
No, hang on a second. I mean, you're not suggesting, are you, that a majority of Ukrainians would want to join the European Union?
Not necessarily majority, but a substantial number.
Yes.
Whose prime minister was forced to U-turn by Vladimir Putin, effectively economic blackmail, who then revolted and then created this situation. I mean, it's not as simple as the EU created this. There is a substantial constituency for support for EU membership.
Because it's been offered to them. Because they've been told you can join the European Union. That's why I say we've given people false hope that they can do something. You know, what the European Union's attitude and our attitude towards the Ukraine should have been is, yes, let's trade together, let's cooperate together. But to offer the Ukraine membership of political union, yes, you're right. You know, there is a substantial minority in the Ukraine that wants that. I don't think we should have offered that in the first place.
Okay. Well, let's take some tweets now. And remember, those of you watching can tweet any questions to us with the hashtag PhoneFarage. And the first one comes from TWD4TWD, who says, I don't know if that's a man or a woman, who says, what would be the 5 top aims of a 5-year term UKIP government? Nigel.
To get Britain freed from political union, number 1. Number 2, to focus very quickly on extending our trade relationship around the rest of the world, because, you know, little Switzerland has better trade links with the rest of the world than we do. Number 3 is to seriously look at the 120,000 pages of close-type legislation that exists and get some genuine deregulation. And I'm going to say it again during this half an hour. those 4.5 million men and women that are running our small businesses, lift the burden off them and they'll start employing hundreds of thousands of people. So that I see as being very, very important. Number 4, get a grip on government spending, be honest with the British public, explain to them we cannot go on living like this, and that'll be my 4th priority. And the 5th, well, this would take some time, but I really do think that the gap that now exists between the 7% that go to the private schools and the 93% that go to state schools, something needs to be done to close widening social division in this country. And that would be the re-offering of selective education to children all over this country.
OK, you came up with 5. That's very impressive. I thought you might run out. No, you did. You got that. That's great.
We can go on if you like.
Our second tweet now, a question from @AngelHeartKnight, who says, you seem to think that white British middle-upper class men should have more rights than everyone else. Why is this? Nigel, why is that? Why do you think that?
I don't understand the question, so I can't answer it. I've no idea what the questioner is hinting at.
All right, OK. And finally, a more light-hearted one. This is just a joke. A more light-hearted one from @Jovawait, who says, are you upset that foreign smog is coming over here and stealing jobs from honest, hard-working British?
I am. I think it's an outrage, and the sooner we're out of this European Union and we can reject all of their pollution, the better.
OK, right. OK, moving on. We're now joined by a student, William Farley. Thanks very much for calling in. What is your question for Nigel, sir?
Good afternoon. Nigel, you have one of the worst attendance records in the European Parliament, and when you're a member of the Fisheries Committee, you only attended 1 meeting in 3 years. Yet you continue to draw your MEP's salary and use the generous expenses available. In any other job with an attendance record like that, you'd be given the sack, wouldn't you?
Well, listen, dear boy, I've been there for 3 parliaments, all right? In the first parliament, I was there with Cleggers, and the attendance record of Clegg and I was exactly the same. There is a reason why in this parliament my attendance and voting record is down. You may not have noticed it, but I actually had a plane crash back in 2010, which took me out for a few months. I have since then had some pretty radical major surgery, and I'm still going through fairly intensive physiotherapy. I have missed a fair few sessions of the Parliament over the course of this Parliament through ill health. I'm also leading a political party in the United Kingdom, and Strasbourg is about 8 hours door-to-door from home. So it's difficult to do all of these things. As far as the committee is concerned, in the first 5 years I was there, I attended the Fisheries Committee regularly. I came to the view at the end of the first 5 years that, frankly, I was whistling in the wind and wasting my time. I've now resigned completely from the committee. I probably should have resigned sooner.
Can I ask how is your health now? Because that was a very, very traumatic experience.
Yeah, well, I had this big operation in November with pretty serious disc work done in my lower neck. And I must say, I managed on Wednesday of this week to stand at the podium for an hour free of pain.
Wow.
So I'm getting there.
OK. And so you're taking a lot of painkillers in order to deal with that?
No, I'm not. I choose my painkillers in a different form.
Right.
But no, I'm not taking any tablets
Yet you
at all.
didn't sway at the podium. That's the surprising thing. OK, right. With us right now is Richard Austin, who's planning to vote for you at the next election. And he's got a question for you about trust in politics. Richard.
Good afternoon, Nigel.
Good afternoon.
There's one thing I'd like to point out to the people who think that, UKIP are just sort of like a nonsense party or whatever. The Labour Party was formed in 1900, I think, if I remember right. And it was something like 24 years later, they were actually part of government. And your party has been around about the same time. You also appeal to working people, real people, in the same sort of sense as Labour used to. However, my question is based on people who are tired of politicians who just lie to them routinely, from councillors to MPs to deputy prime ministers, one could say, if you weren't being slanderous. How would you deal with that? What would you say to people in your party or in others? Let's assume that you were elected as Deputy Prime Minister, which is perfectly possible. What would you say to people in your party?
Nigel.
Well, I mean, look, to me, I think one of the really big problems is that we've got career politics. If you meet people in the Labour, Conservative or Liberal Democrat parties and you sat them on a couch like this and asked them a series of questions on really big issues facing this country, it's almost difficult to tell which party they come from. So, and this is because we've got this growth of men and women coming into politics straight after Oxford University, going into research offices and becoming MPs at very young ages. So that's one of the problems that we've got. The second problem, and this is what I believe one of the reasons we've got so little real debate going on is that so many of the big decisions that affect our lives are made somewhere else. I mean, we used to fight general elections on labour laws. Yeah, these were the fundamental things in the 70s and 80s that we voted on in general elections, deciding to go for, you know, Thatcher or Foot or whatever it may be. Now, when it comes to employment law, all of that is now decided somewhere else. So I think the very act of getting out of political union and getting back the ability to decide these things in Westminster will begin to give you a kind of politics where you see more division of debate. And I believe with that we may see actually rather more honesty in politics.
How do you actually, in practical terms, get working people into politics? I mean, Richard was talking there about you speaking out to working people. Yeah. That's one thing, but how do you actually get them into Parliament?
Well, this of course needs the parties themselves to take a rather different approach to who is or is not fit to be a prospective member of Parliament for their party. And you know, the number of working class members of Parliament now is, you know, it really is very, very small indeed. And it's as if both the Blair machine and now the Conservative one are going for safety. Because almost by definition, somebody who's started at a lower rung of the social ladder without some of the advantages that other people have got, for them to get to a position where they might be a prospective parliamentary candidate means they're going to be characters. Yeah. It means they're going to be personalities, and the parties don't want personalities. They become too risk averse. Okay. You know, I can't overturn that myself, but what I can say is if I look at the social mix that exists within UKIP, it's fantastic. You know, we have got a wonderfully eclectic group of people.
Okay, okay. Well, with us now is Naomi Webb, who is a legal caseworker and campaigner. And Ms. Webb, what is your question for Mr. Farage?
Oh, hello there. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So it's come to our attention recently that the current government has recently banned friends and family members from sending in parcels to prisoners.
Yeah.
And this includes sending in books. And I was just wondering what your opinion on that was, and whether you think that the government should reverse that ban.
Yeah, I sent a book to a prisoner recently. Okay. And I was a bit surprised that the book I'd sent this chap, his wife contacted me to say he wasn't allowed to read it, and it was a book written by me. It wasn't that subversive. Well, it was a bit, you know.
Well, it's actually
so I am aware of this, and I hadn't actually realised myself that those rules were in place. It seems to me that on the one hand we should want prisoners to be reading books and getting educated and, you know, bettering themselves. On the other, clearly there is the risk that there will be subversive material or, you know, books that incite hatred or whatever it may be. I would have thought the answer to this is dead simple. Rather than this being dealt with at a London governmental level, it should be up to the governor of the prison.
Okay.
You know, if the governor of the prison is happy for the prisoners to have books and his staff have got the time to make sure nothing illicit is getting through, then let him get on with it, it would seem to me.
Caller, can I ask you what your feelings are on this issue?
I completely agree. It should be up to the discretion of the governor of each prison what should be allowed in and out of their prison. And we know that books help educate people, they help to rehabilitate people, and that's the most important thing that we want to come out of our prison system. And so to ban friends and family from sending in books, but it seems illogical to me when we're committed to rehabilitation.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right,
thank you very much. Thank you. Let's go back to Twitter quickly, and if we can get quick answers to these. At Faisal Rahim IV says, you're really doing this, you realise how crazy Twitter handles are. He asks, what would the foreign policy of UKIP Britain look like, considering that even the US are unhappy with the idea of UK leaving the EU? What's your reply to that? But if you could focus on the issue of the US's attitude towards us leaving.
Since 1945, virtually everything the Americans have asked us to do or wanted us to do has been wrong.
Right.
And Harold Wilson should be a mini hero for saying to Lyndon Johnson, no, it's a special relationship, but we don't do what you tell us and we're not going into Vietnam. Thank goodness. Thank goodness. We do not need to follow American foreign policy. A UKIP foreign policy would look like this. There'd be fewer wars that we get involved in.
Right. OK, thank you. And now, OK, we had just one tweet, but we now have on the phone a favourable question from Optimistic Bollard. Oh no, this is a tweet. What can the man on the street do to facilitate our rejection of the undemocratic EU Commission?
Join the People's Army.
Join the People's Army. That's
join
UKIP,
join UKIP, and let's use...
That's a little bit Maoist, that phrase.
Well, it's a very English form of Maoism, believe you me. No, this is how I see it.
Right.
We have an entire establishment lined up to do everything they can to keep us inside political union with Europe. And all we have is UKIP fighting against it. And I think that we've a chance in 7 weeks' time to do something very dramatic in British politics. But it needs people who agree with us to get involved and put their shoulders to the wheel. OK,
and final tweet. Tom Hubbard says, what's UKIP's stance on drug policy? Will you continue the ineffective prohibition or will you learn from Portugal?
Well, this is a very interesting subject. This is one where I differ strongly from my party,
right.
Which proves, in fact, going back to a previous caller, Janine, that it's not a one-man party. Mm-hmm. I personally think that the war on drugs was lost many, many years ago, and that the lives of millions of people in Britain are being made miserable by the huge criminal element that surrounds the illicit drug trade. And I do think, you're right, I do think that Portugal does show us that there is perhaps a better, more enlightened way to deal with this. I'm not pro-drugs, by the way, you know, as somebody with teenage children, and I've seen, you know, fairly close to hand the damage that drugs can do to young people. Mm-hmm. So I hate drugs. I've never taken them myself. I hope I never do. I hate drugs. But I just have a feeling that the criminalisation of all these drugs is not actually helping British society. Now, that's my view, and I think we should look at it. And if ever there was a subject where we needed a genuine Royal Commission, not a kick it into the long grass, but a genuine Royal Commission to examine Portugal, to examine perhaps what's happened in 1 or 2 states in America and what's happened in Switzerland, this subject would be it. My party do not share that view, but that is mine. OK.
Remember, you can keep on sending your tweets into Phone Farage. But next we're going to hear from a Philip Neal, who's a former soldier and UKIP party member. Mr. Neal. Hello, sir.
Hello there. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Hello.
I would like to ask you, Nigel, given all the cutbacks that we've had in the military, what your take would be if you had the chance. Would you reverse those cuts, or do you think they were necessary?
I just don't understand what these people are doing. I mean, it must be very difficult for traditional Conservative voters to see a Conservative administration reducing the British Army to a size that it was at about the time of the reign of Queen Anne, when we used to use mercenaries on quite a big scale. The idiocy of thinking they're going to have extra recruitment through the territorials who are now being branded as the Army Reserve. It isn't going to work. Mm-hmm. It is not going to work. And to see Portsmouth now being turned from a naval dockyard and base into a museum city, I find it absolutely incredible. You know, our defence spending...
I have to wonder what would happen if the Falklands War were to happen again. Oh. Where would Britain stand and who would it turn to? Because are they saying that if we expand the military in Europe, that Europe would then come to the defence?
Well, I'd love to see the French help us. I mean, at the moment, this is Britain's foreign and military policy at the moment. If we have an emergency like the Falklands, the French apparently are going to lend us their carriers. I don't think so.
I don't think so.
I really don't think so. And I think the cutbacks have been... I mean, I'm not for increased government spending, as we've teased out earlier in this debate today. The last UKIP manifesto suggested an increase of defence spending of about 40%. We will obviously be coming up with our manifesto for 2015 at some point this year, but I think this has been a very big mistake. If the Falklands, albeit the Falklands are better defended this time, You know, for the Argentines to take the Falklands now, it would cost them heavily.
Okay.
To do so, but if they did,
I also wonder what would happen. What's going to happen to all these young people who are going to be denied the chance to learn about self-respect, about patriotism, about having integrity? These young people that would have joined the military are no longer going to be allowed to do that. So where does that leave this country?
I agree with all of those sentiments, you know, and I actually think the forces are very much something that is for the good of society. I know some people come out of the military and don't do well, but I've employed ex-soldiers and airmen before in business and always found them to be very, very good, disciplined people. And you're right, that opportunity will now go to fewer people.
Okay, thank you. And also, Mr. Neil, thank you very much for your service.
And by the way, can I just say, Tim, that I've regularly been hauled over the coals for on the one hand saying we'll fight fewer wars, and on the other saying we should increase military spending. There is no inconsistency between those positions, because it seems to me that the defence budget is really a bit like paying the fire insurance on the house. We're living in a world that's very, very uncertain, and I don't think we're big enough and strong enough right now to play a proper global role.
Okay, well now we're going to hear from Linda Jack, who is a foster carer who voted Lib Dem at the last election. Ms. Jack, what's your question, please?
Hi, I was very struck, Nigel, about what you said, you know, challenging Nick Clegg about the fact that he said only 7% of our laws were influenced by the EU. You and UKIP tend to trot out all the time the 75%, of which there's no evidence. Now, presumably, you heard the Today programme yesterday, where the fact checker said that actually that was correct in terms of the 17 to 14% of influence. And if you go to the Full Fact website, you will see also there that they talk about a similar ratio of how many of our laws are affected. And I think also if you look at that in the context of, it's not just about the law, it's about the impact of that law. Because, you know, in some ways, whether it's 75% or 14% or 7%, it has very, you know, it's the impact that's important. So I'd like you to justify to me why you say 75% and how you think that affects our daily life in terms of the legislation that affects our life.
Well, the reason I was as strong on that point as I was is that the week before Clegg had said the figure is 7%. There's a note in the House of Commons library, and it's clear and unequivocal. So we had a study of that, and actually on the first page it says 7% of our primary laws, i.e. Acts of Parliament, come directly from the European Union. Yeah. But it also says on page 1 that it's virtually impossible to find a truly accurate figure, because here and right across Europe people are trying to do this. But it also says that even the British government accepts that it's at least 50% of our laws. Now, you're quite right with the second point about it's the impact of those laws, and I completely understand that. I mean, let's put it to you like this. Britain's biggest industry, financial services, no longer does the House of Commons even debate the issue. All that legislation now comes to us from the European Union. Employment legislation, something over 90% of that legislation comes to us.
Hang on, can you tell me which employment legislation, and I'm somebody that as a worker, an ordinary worker unlike you, has actually benefited from lots of that employment legislation, which we wouldn't have under a Tory government without the EU. So which would you actually take away? So are you in the same...
Well, that's a separate question. That's a separate question. But just to back up my point, the most authoritative...
When you talk about the legislation you don't like, you don't actually really specify what it is, and you don't look at what the impact is on ordinary people if you repealed that legislation.
Well, when it comes to employment law, I made the point earlier on in this debate that if you have a law to protect people in work, that may be very suitable if it's for Marks and Spencer or Unilever, but it may not be suitable for the local shop down the road or the local engineering company, and that actually what the effect of... I mean, I tell you something, I do go out and meet a lot of people on business parks, you know, start-ups, small businesses, and you ask them, how's it going? Yeah, we're going fine. So I always say, are you going to employ people? Forget it. Forget it. Don't need the hassle, don't need the industrial tribunal, don't need the legal fees. So we do have... we do have a very strong argument that much of that employee legislation is actually adding...
We would have employment tribunals. You're saying that people should have the right. And I know during the last election, some of the business people saying they, you know, actually admitting they do not employ women of childbirth bearing age because of the costs associated with that. You know, they actually admitted that they did that.
I know.
But you know, are you saying we shouldn't protect women of childbearing age? You're saying you shouldn't protect the
Well,
workers?
what I'm saying is this, that sometimes legislation actually has the opposite effect to that which was intended. And the case of young women of childbearing age, there is some now quite strong evidence that young women are being discriminated against getting jobs in the first place because of the fear the employer has on costs. So look, but can I make this point to you? There is almost no point in you and I having this conversation, all the while we're members of the European Union. And that's really what I'm saying. It is only by divorcing ourselves from the European Union that we can have this debate, that we can vote for parties, we can form governments and shape future legislation. And that's the extent to which, you know, we have got a parliament and a government that frankly is impotent.
But, you know, this is why I'm challenging you, because I want to see where you're talking about the 75%. I don't see it.
Right, OK, back to that point.
Can I just say, the things that affect me most are what happens at a local government...
No. These are two separate questions.
In terms of my health service. Now,
you've twice asked me
I
now.
agree with you, because I actually think the privatisation...
OK, we've got the point about the specific laws that affect people. Let's close by really hammering down this point about the percentage.
So Clegg claimed 7%. I thought it was a stupid thing to do, and yet in debate 2, he repeated it.
Yeah.
Gordon Brown, when he was Prime Minister, in reply to written questions in the Commons and Lords, said at least 50% of the laws that affect this country come from Brussels. The European Parliament office, just round the corner here, say at least half of our laws. Viviane Reding, who is the Commission Vice President, was in London the other week and said 70% of our laws. The most definitive study is the one that took place in Germany. It was conducted by Roman Herzog, the former president of Germany, and his conclusion, a big study from 1998 to 2006, was that 84% of German national law was made in the European Union. And we've looked at the figures. For example, since, you know, if I wanted to play Clegg's game, since the coalition came into being, there have been 135 Acts of Parliament that have been passed. And lots of other small, statutory instruments which are more difficult to define. But since the Lisbon Treaty came in, 4 years ago, there have been 3,600 new laws that have come from Brussels. All I can promise you is this: my figure of 75% is much closer to a true figure than Nick's of 7.
OK. Well, let's move on to a question from Bharat Jashanmal, a business consultant. So what would you like to ask Mr Farage?
Good afternoon, Mr Farage.
Good afternoon.
I understand your reasons for wishing that Britain unilaterally leaves the EU, so we won't go into those, obviously. Presumably, therefore, you agree with Alex Salmond and the SNP's desire to leave the United Kingdom, albeit through the process of a referendum as opposed to unilaterally, given that their reasons for not wishing to be governed by a bunch of bureaucrats in London mirror your own concerns about the British being governed by Brussels.
No, because what Salmond is offering the Scottish people, and indeed, I see this referendum in September in Scotland as being completely false. Because what Salmond is saying is we don't want to be part of the United Kingdom, we want to be independent and part of the European Union. Well, you cannot be independent and be a member of the European Union. So I'm afraid the whole debate north of the border is an entirely false debate. Do I believe in national self-determination? Yes, I do. And if Scotland does vote to leave the United Kingdom, it's not something I want, but if they do it, I will respect it. I, however, do not think that Scotland will vote to leave the United Kingdom, because I don't think Salmond's economic alternatives actually work.
OK, let's move on to...
I wasn't talking so much about Salmond's economic theories. I was talking about this right of self-determination.
Yeah.
That principle you have no problem with.
Well, of course not. Would I deny the right of self-determination to the Scots if they wanted to divorce themselves from the UK and become province number whatever it is of the United States of Europe? It's not what I'd vote for, but if of course it's what Scotland wants, they must have it.
No, but I wasn't talking about their desire to join the EU.
Well, I was.
As you said, that's entirely up to them.
But rather stupid. Rather stupid to have an independence referendum when it's not actually being offered. Yeah. That's all I said. That's all I'm saying.
Tomorrow, if the Welsh want to do the same thing, that's not an issue.
Well, do you think it's an issue?
I don't. I'm going in terms of how your beliefs are. You want to leave the EU because of the reasons you've put forward. Now, other people may disagree with you, as they do. I'm asking you because of your principles of self-determination.
Yes, I believe in national self-determination, and it makes me absolutely laugh when I hear, the British government say sovereignty in Gibraltar is vital, and yet sovereignty in the United Kingdom clearly isn't.
OK, well, let's move on to Mr. Charles Ashley, who is a UKIP member and who wants to clarify your views on gay marriage. Sir.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
What is the party's policy on same-sex marriage? Has it been changed last month, and if so, why?
There's been some confusion over this, and something was said by a press officer that probably shouldn't have, in fact, definitely shouldn't have been. Look, the gay marriage, whether you like it or not, has happened. It's happened. And it is very, very difficult to see a British Parliament that is going to reverse it. Very difficult indeed. But my primary concern over this issue, when it first broke as an issue that the coalition had decided was a priority for reasons that are completely unknown to me, because it seemed that, civil partnership was actually working rather well. I don't think I've had a single letter from a constituent in 15 years saying we need to have gay marriage, though I had lots asking for civil partnerships in the early days when I was first elected. My concern is this, Charles. My concern is, and it's very interesting, I've been saying this now for 18 months, and a House of Commons committee this week has very much backed up my view. My concern is that all the while we are subject to the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg, we now have the risk that churches, particularly the Church of England, interestingly, because we have an established church in this country, that churches may be forced to conduct marriage ceremonies which are against their principles. And I just want to make sure that we do not finish up in a situation where our tolerance of one minority comes at a very, very big level of intolerance towards another minority, namely the churches and the faith groups in this country. So that is my position. I want to defend the faith communities to make sure they are not forced to conduct gay marriages against their wishes.
Charles, does that answer the question for you?
I think it does, yes. Thank you very much.
OK, that's marvellous. Thank you so much. OK, some quick tweets very quickly. Here's a tweet from Gary Coleman. Gary says, Nige, I'm phoning from a London commuter train, talking to you through translator because I can't speak English. Hope you're not too scared. I think that's
I never said I was scared. I said I felt uncomfortable on a busy commuter train when no one spoke English around me.
Okay.
Which does reflect a very big change in society that nobody really asked for.
Okay. This, of course, is in reference. That's, of course, in reference to your controversial comments about commuter trains. Okay. Our next tweet from Brian Sylvester, one of your councillors. He asks, "Do you seriously believe that if we had a referendum and voted to come out, that Mr. Cameron would actually take us out?"
Well, I think that if we reached a position where the British people in a referendum had voted to do something and a Prime Minister ignored them, I don't think he'd last very long.
OK. And finally, from someone called Debunk UKIP Lies, so prepare yourself, this might be negative. You talk about unelected people in the EU, but isn't the House of Lords unelected? How about all those quangos? Are they... ?
I couldn't agree more.
Right.
I couldn't agree more.
I expected that to be anti.
But I couldn't agree more. You're absolutely right. There are some important reforms that need to happen in this country. But actually, don't put the cart before the horse. Let's sort the European question out first. Let's have a sovereign Parliament in Westminster and United Kingdom, and then we can deal with those other issues.
OK, remember you can get in touch at the hashtag is Phone Farage. Next up is John Bird, a retired company director. He's another potential voter, but has some specific concerns about one of your policies. Mr. Bird.
Hello, Nigel.
Hello.
Good afternoon to you. First of all, my congratulations to you on the two TV debates, and I do share many of your views on Europe. Now, I have two quick, easy questions for you, Nigel. First of all, are UKIP serious about reintroducing smoking in pubs and restaurants? And the second question is, what is UKIP's policy about fracking in national parks, areas of outstanding national beauty?
Well, the first question is, I think the smoking ban is one of the most extraordinarily illiberal things that has ever happened in this country. I noticed that across the rest of Europe, they're applying more common sense. The Germans have reversed the ban in several. That does not mean that we're going to return to the days when you go out with your family for dinner and the people at the next table, you know, all light up their roll-ups or whatever it may be. But what it does mean is that premises, pubs, restaurants, whatever it may be, should have the ability to offer separate smoking areas. Yes, I believe in that very, very strongly indeed. And can I say that we're now on the verge of a Conservative-led government going for plain packaging on cigarettes. I scarcely believe how stupid these people are, because it's been tried in Australia and it's been manna from heaven for organised crime and for counterfeiters. It is a daft and stupid thing to do. And frankly, if you're going to have plain packaging on cigarettes, why not on a bottle of Pernod, or a bottle of beer, or on a Krispy Kreme donut? I mean, where does this end? And I think the state is really far, far outreaching itself.
And fracking in national
fracking, I think this country is looking a gift horse in the mouth. I think that shale gas offers us some fantastic opportunities, but, and you're probably referring to the South Downs National Park, where I know that feelings run very high. You know, we've got to try and do this in a way that is not environmentally damaging. So there's almost a definition thing here, isn't there? If there is a national park, then clearly we've got to be very, very sensitive. And we may decide, actually, that national parks are not the right place to conduct fracking operations.
Well, joining us now is Rupert Myers, who is a barrister. Thanks for phoning in, sir. What have you got to ask Nigel?
Hi, Nigel. Polls say that you're the politician that voters would prefer to have a pint with. You quite often photographed holding one. And so you might have heard today that for the first time, people with severe drink-related liver disease are going to be considered eligible for transplants at a time when liver disease of all kinds is going up. And around 4,500 people a year are dying just from alcohol-related liver disease. And my question, and it's really yes or no, is whether UKIP thinks that people who've had their livers destroyed through excessive drinking should be in the transplant queue right alongside and therefore sometimes in front of people whose lifestyles aren't to blame, and whether you think that opt-out organ donation is a possible solution to a shortage of donors.
Difficult question to answer. Does UKIP as a party have a position on this? No, we don't. Do we have to have a position on this by the time the next general election comes along? I suspect we probably do. And you could apply this argument to lung treatment, and particularly, of course, the real modern scourge, which is obesity. You know, obesity is causing more health problems in this country than anything else. So, you know, should we decide that because someone's 8 stone overweight, they aren't deserving of the same treatment as somebody with a heart condition who's not 8 stone overweight? I don't know, Rupert, the answer to these questions. It's a very, very difficult moral judgment.
OK, well, next up is the economist John Tuppen. Mr. Tuppen, what's your question, sir?
Good afternoon to you, sir.
Good afternoon.
I have been left with a worrying feeling following the debate with Nick Clegg, and that is a comment that you made, and the comment was, with regard to immigration, the white minority is being left behind. I supposed that you mean the existing population that have been here for years, and that will include many colours and faiths. I found those words dangerous, and then you went on to say that you fear trouble in Europe, but may well create strife at home with these sorts of comments.
Well, come on, be fair. I did also say that in London, the community that was particularly being left behind by open-door immigration was the Afro-Caribbean community, where youth unemployment is 50% amongst that sector of the population. So, come on, you know, let's balance this up. I did specifically mention, yes, you're right, a white working class who were being left behind and were finding themselves priced out of the jobs market by open-door immigration, which is happening on a scale we've never seen before in this country and which is distorting the labour market. So I understand the sentiment of your question, and I can absolutely assure you that there is nothing I want to do to stir up antagonism or division in society. Actually, quite the opposite. And it is my view that if we go on with open-door immigration on the scale that it's currently running at, or perhaps it'll even increase, that actually we will find a divided society and this country a less pleasant place to live.
Mr. Tuppen, do you feel reassured by that answer if you're
Well, yes, I do, because I hate racism in any form at all, okay. And I think probably it may be more sensible, not that I can give advice, to
Yes, you
politicians, to give to politicians, that I think one should include people in an area of all races and faiths, not just white or Afro-Caribbean. It might isolate some people, but there'll be others as well.
Well, that may be true, but that may be true. But the facts are, in the big cities, and I'm talking about the Midlands and the North particularly, there is a very left-behind white working class. But listen, you have my assurance. I will be careful with these debates, not to do anything that inflames opinion.
Okay. Well, joining us now from Dallas, Texas, is Shannon Burchett, who runs a risk management business. Mr. Burchett, how is all this looking on the other side of the Atlantic?
Well, I think it's been closely watched, particularly with the impact that the Greek bailout had as the problem. So I think people here are watching the European situation, and I think after the debates last week and earlier this week, I think the U.S. politicians are probably studying Mr. Farage's debating style. But the question I had from this, and thinking of this really from the business I'm involved in, the financial markets, if the UK does exit the European political union, and if UKIP has a role in the new government, what would you expect, Mr. Farage, in terms of the impact on the UK trade with us here in North America and on the financial markets?
More opportunities. What we've done, I mean, just one directive, the Alternative Investment Fund Management Directive, just one directive from Brussels has seen 25% of our hedge fund industry leave London. Some of it's gone to Geneva and Zurich, but some of it's gone to Singapore, and we'll never see that business back again. So I see a huge opportunity in financial services, for the UK to become, and London in particular, to become a sort of giant Switzerland just outside the limits of the European political union. As far as trade with North America is concerned, well, of course, as you know, albeit very slowly and with some very strong French objections, there is talk of the European Union and the USA having a trade deal. If Britain wasn't a member of the European Union, I think those talks would be much further advanced. And one of the big advantages that I see for the UK outside the European Union is we can start making our own trade relationships with the big economies of the world, and in particular with many of the emerging economies of the world. And it's interesting, a lot of them speak English, which gives us a very big advantage.
Okay, well, we've got some last tweets here. This from Luke Walker. He says, Farage says his poor attendance plus voting record due to recovery from 2010 plane crash. But what about the record of other UKIP MEPs?
Well, 3 of our MEPs have attendance and voting records over 90%.
Right.
They're amongst the highest.
You've got more than 3 MEPs.
Well, I'm just giving you an example.
Okay.
So it's a mixed bag. It's a mixed bag.
Oh, right.
Look, if you want an MEP that goes to Brussels 5 days a week, that signs in every day for €300 tax-free, that enriches themselves as much as they can, and takes part in lots and lots of votes, none of which they'll ever be able to win in the British national interest, don't vote UKIP.
Right.
But if you want to vote for people that are going into the European Parliament with the aim that one day they'll get rid of their own jobs and who will spend their time speaking and campaigning in this country to help get Britain out of this political union, understanding they'll earn less than the other MEPs, then vote UKIP.
So you're not really voting for a UKIP MEP to be an MEP?
You're not voting for someone to go native within the Brussels system. That is quite right.
Right, but people might want to vote for someone to scrutinise legislation. I mean, no matter if the long-term goal is to leave Europe, they might be surprised to hear that you don't even scrutinise what's going on.
I didn't say that. I didn't say that. Okay. And we have some UKIP MEPs who are very actively involved in committee stage and all the rest of it. But it is not our absolute priority.
Okay. Now one from Oliver Holtham, who says, what would UKIP do if they lost a referendum on Britain's membership of the EU?
Be very depressed.
Do you think there is a possibility that might happen?
No, none at all.
Really?
Of course not.
Absolutely. It didn't happen in 75. In 75, it's surprisingly...
Different time.
Right.
Different time.
You're going to be campaigning against all the major parties.
And a British public that believed and trusted and were deferential to their leaders. That is not the case anymore.
Okay, okay. And from someone who calls themselves Zorro P. Freely, I think that's a joke. Can I thank you in advance for a Labour victory in 2015? He's got a hashtag split the silly vote. Yeah. I mean, okay, it is a joke, but it's a serious question. A lot of Conservatives are worried about.
I know.
That they will vote for you, and as a result, let Mr. Miliband in to number 10.
It has been the biggest myth and misunderstanding of modern British politics, the assumption that everybody that votes UKIP is a middle-class Shire Tory. Yes, of course, there are middle-class Shire Tories voting for UKIP in growing numbers. But even faster than that has been our growth amongst working-class voters and supporters. And that is where the real bulk of the increase in the UKIP vote has come from. After that by-election in Eastleigh last year, there was some real analysis done. Only 1 in 3 UKIP voters had voted Tory at the last general election. 2 out of 3 of our voters in Eastleigh had not voted Conservative, and most of them never would as long as they lived, because they were coming to us from old Labour. There are 500,000 switchers from the Liberal Democrats who've come to us since the last election, and most significantly, and perhaps excitingly of all, over 20% of the UKIP vote is coming from people who are non-voters, and we're re-engaging them in the process. There's been a book, I shouldn't do advertising here, I know, but there's been a book published this week. It was published on Monday. It's called Revolt on the Right, okay? And it's been published by the academics Goodwin and Ford, and it actually for the first time does a big academic study into who the UKIP voters are. UKIP will not cost the Conservatives the next election. David Cameron as leader will cost them the next election. And even if UKIP disappeared, you know, if I fell under a bus and we packed our bags and said, that's it, there's no more UKIP, still the Conservatives would barely recover or notice any difference. Because the analysis that Ashcroft did again last weekend is only 10% of UKIP voters would even consider voting for this Conservative Party.
Okay, okay, we've just got time for a couple of last questions. We've got one up on the phone from Ken Andrew, who's got a question for you about tuition fees. Ken.
Nigel, congratulations on wiping the floor with Mr. Clegg this week. Support for Mr. Clegg dropped off a cliff the day he did a U-turn on tuition fees. I'm wondering what UKIP's position is on tuition fees, because it's an issue that hasn't gone away, and I think many people would be very interested.
Yeah, I agree with that. I have to say, Ken, you know, my position is I think we're sending too many youngsters to university. I think we're encouraging people to go and get degrees, in many cases not particularly good degrees, and not improving their life chances one little bit. I blame Maureen Lipman for the whole thing. If you remember the advert, oh, he's got an ology. So we've got a lot of people going to get ologies. And I think the way we've demeaned in Britain the idea of people learning skills and trades is just stupid. You know, in Germany, if your 16-year-old son or daughter says they want to learn a skill, a trade, be a carpenter, a designer, or whatever it is, you know, you're over the moon and delighted. Yeah. In this country, we think it's sort of shaming that anyone should want to do that. So,
well, will you abolish tuition fees?
Well, my answer is, if we get to a position where we're sending fewer people to university, then we can substantially reduce the almost standard now £9,000 a year, because that's what it's become, and get it down to a much more realistic level. It would be a lovely aspiration to think that we wouldn't have to charge anybody. But if we send fewer people, if we're getting better value for money out of all of our public services, we can certainly radically reduce it. Whether we can abolish it completely, that remains to be seen.
Final question on the phone. Mr. Tony Sanderson has a question for you about the leadership debate. Tony.
Yes, hello. Mr. Miliband said yesterday he didn't think you should be part of the leadership debate, which I can understand, bearing in mind that at the last general election, for example, the Democratic Union has got 8 seats, the Scottish National Party 6. I could go on down the list, but the Green Party got 1, the Respect Party got 1. So surely all these people have more right to speak at these debates than you would have.
Well, you know, if you want to go on history, you're right. But politics has changed hugely in this country since 2010. UKIP is a fundamental part of that change. We've shown it in European elections. We're showing it in by-elections. We're breaking into local government at district and county council level. We've got a very good, clear, steady position as the third party in the polls. Now, look, if they want to exclude me from all these debates, they can do so.
Well, I'm not saying you should be excluded, but all these other people should have a voice as well. I mean, in the last by-election, you the Labour Party got something like 20,000 seats. You got 4,000, votes. So actually, didn't perform
well,
that
actually,
well.
if you look at the by-elections that have taken place in Labour, Tory and Liberal areas and add them all up, we're actually getting more votes than anybody because we're drawing our support very evenly, from the north, south, east and west of these islands. They can exclude me.
For example, in the last
they can exclude me
election,
if they want to.
Yeah, well, the last European elections, you got quite a few seats, but almost half of those people have either been deselected or have left or
and how is that relevant?
And then you got no seats in the following general election. Just because you get a good showing in the European elections doesn't necessarily mean you'll get a good showing in the parliamentary elections.
Right, well, if you're one of those people who doesn't think UKIP's significant in British politics, you're fully entitled to that view. I think most people recognise that actually, not only do we have a substantial level of support in this country, but we're actually reframing and reshaping many of the national debates. Now, if they want to...
I'm not saying you should be excluded, I'm just saying all these other people should be included as well.
It's not unreasonable, is it, not to say, if you're going to get in...
It would be very difficult...
You don't have parliamentary seats. The Green Party does have a parliamentary seat. Why shouldn't they be involved?
Because the Green Party are a much smaller voice in British politics. And actually, make-up in the House of Commons is only one now of many factors, given that we've got devolved assemblies, county councils, unitary authorities, European parliaments. Taken across all of those things, looking at the opinion polls, UKIP is the third biggest party in this country.
But it's parliamentary seats where you don't win. I mean, you could have stood at Eastleigh, but you chose not to. You could have won that one if you'd stood, probably.
Yes, that would have been a disaster. I'd have been on my own in the House of Commons and unable to lead the party as a candidate into these European elections. I believe...
David Cameron's in Parliament and he leads his party, and so does Ed Miliband.
Does he? Well, it's fairly questionable in my view whether he does, actually, but there you are.
Mr Sanderson, thank you very much for running out of time.
Right.
Nigel Farage, thank you so much for taking part. I hope you enjoyed speaking to our readers and our audience. Very intelligent, very articulate people they were.
Yeah, great.
Great
Superb.
people. Thank you.
Much nicer than speaking to people in Westminster.
And thank you, everyone, for taking part and being with us today. Remember, you can watch the highlights of this on our website, telegraph.co.uk. Thank you so much for taking part, everyone who did. Goodbye and have a great weekend.